For the last 800 years, everyone in the galaxy knew one thing for sure. Humans were just farmers. They grew crops, wrote some decent poetry, and were experts at staying out of galactic politics. So, in a massive chamber where 200 different species were shouting about the apocalypse, nobody gave the human ambassador a second look. That was the biggest mistake they'd ever make. Stick around and I'll tell you why you should never ever write off a farmer. On the main screen, 12,000 crimson icons swarmed across the star chart, a tide of pure destruction aimed right at the heart of the galaxy. This was the Krath Dominion, a 50-year-old terror that haunted everyone's nightmares. They were a species of pure warriors, living by a terrifyingly simple rule: the strong rule and the weak are crushed. They had already conquered and enslaved billions, erasing 40 entire star systems from existence. And now, they were coming for the rest of us. Fear, it turns out, sounds the same in every language. Ambassador Trix, a small, fluffy creature, shrieked, "It's hopeless! They have 12,000 warships and we can barely scrape together 4,000! A giant ambassador made of living rock rumbled, "We will offer them our riches!" "You idiot," hissed a serpent-like diplomat wrapped around a pillar. "The Krath don't make deals, they don't negotiate, they just take." The screaming and shouting erupted all over again, a chaotic mess of pure terror. But in a quiet, forgotten corner of the room, the human delegation just sat there. There were only 3 of them. Ambassador Elena Chen, a woman whose graying hair framed eyes as calm and deep as a forest lake, sat between 2 aides who looked like they were about to be sick. No one paid any attention to the humans. When we joined the galactic community 847 years ago, we were so full of hope. We had visions of charting unknown stars and discovering mind-bending new science. Instead, the powerful galactic empires took one look at our beautiful green Earth and basically said, "The galaxy is full of warriors and engineers. What it really needs is a good gardener." And just like that, humanity was assigned its role as the galactic vegetable patch. For centuries, they saw us as simple, harmless, and completely insignificant, which was exactly how we wanted it. In an instant, the chamber fell deathly quiet. A new face dominated the screen, a creature of pure nightmare with skin like gray stone, 4 muscular arms, and eyes that were just pits of endless cruelty. This was Admiral Vorath, Supreme Commander of the Krath Fleet. "Greetings, Galactic Council," he snarled, his voice a low rumble like grinding stone. "I bring a message from the Dominion." Our High Chancellor, trying his best to sound authoritative, could only squeak out, "Admiral, let's talk about a peaceful resolution." The Admiral let out a laugh, a horrible scraping noise that made your teeth hurt. "Peace? You have the wrong idea. We didn't come here to talk. We came to give you an ultimatum. In 72 hours, our Armada arrives. You have 2 choices. Option 1, unconditional surrender. Every ship, every planet, every living soul becomes our property. Option 2, complete and total annihilation. We will scour your worlds until they are nothing but dust." "That's barbaric!" cried Ambassador Trix. "There are billions of us." "I know," Vorath said, a terrifying smile spreading across his face. "Everything you cherish will belong to us, or it will cease to exist," the voice from the screen echoed, its lipless mouth forming a cruel smirk. "Decide before we get there. Make your choice." The line went dead, plunging the chamber into a shocked silence that lasted for a single second before shattering into absolute chaos. Ambassadors were sobbing, screaming orders into their communicators, telling their home worlds to run or surrender. But amidst the bedlam, in the tiny human section, Ambassador Elena Chen stood up. She looked at her aides. "Patch me through to Earth on a secure line," she said, her voice perfectly calm. "You 2 stay here. Don't miss a thing. Let me know if the situation changes." "Ma'am," one of the aides whispered, his hands shaking. "What are we going to do? We have no fleet, no superweapons. We're just farmers." Elena met his terrified gaze, and for a moment he saw something else in her eyes, something ancient, powerful, and unbelievably fierce. It was the secret humanity had been keeping for 1,000 years. Just watch the show, she said gently. It's all going to be okay. And with that, she slipped out a side door unnoticed. In the grand theater of the galaxy, the humans were just stagehands nobody ever saw. The next few hours were a whirlwind of desperate deals and pointless strategies. Alliances were formed and fell apart in the same breath. Some species swore they would fight to the bitter end, while others were already composing their letters of surrender. Hours dragged on, and a thick blanket of despair fell over the council chamber. Then, a technician's sharp gasp cut through the gloom. "Chancellor," she shouted, pointing a trembling finger at her console, "you need to see this, a new energy reading." Every head in the room whipped around to the main screen, expecting to see the Krath had arrived early. They were wrong. Far behind the approaching Krath fleet, in a sector of space that was known to be completely empty, a massive, unbelievable energy signature had just blipped into existence. "That's impossible," an ambassador muttered. "There is nothing out there." But the sensor readings were undeniable. The energy source was expanding, growing more powerful by the second, soon dwarfing the output of a nearby star. As the council stared, paralyzed, reality itself seemed to split open. A tear in the fabric of space began to form, and things started pouring out. "We have contacts," the technician whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Dozens. No, hundreds. My God, there are thousands of them." At that very second, Ambassador Elena Chen strolled back into the chamber, looking as relaxed as if she'd just been out for a cup of tea. She sat down, and as her stunned aides stared at her, she simply folded her hands in her lap and watched the screen. From that impossible rift in space, a fleet of warships emerged, moving in perfect, terrifying silence. Their hulls were a deep, starless black. Their designs were sharp, aggressive, and unlike anything ever seen before. And they were broadcasting no transponder codes, no identification at all. "Give me a count," the Chancellor choked out. The technician took a deep breath. 15,000 ships, sir. 15,000 unidentified warships just appeared on the Krath's 6. The fear in the chamber shifted. The Krath were a monster they knew. This was something else entirely. As a fresh wave of panic washed over the council, the small, furry ambassador Trix scrambled over to Elena Chen, her eyes a mix of total terror and a tiny spark of hope. "Who are they?" she begged. For the first time, Ambassador Chen let a small, sharp smile touch her lips. "They're old friends of ours," she said, her voice clear and strong in the now silent room. "We call them the Terran Defense Fleet, and frankly, they've been waiting an awfully long time for someone to try and start a war. Can you imagine finding out that everything you knew about a people was a complete and total fabrication? For 800 years, the galaxy had pegged humanity as the quiet, harmless gardeners who kept to themselves. That was all about to end. On the command deck of the battleship Dominion's Wrath, the four-eyed Admiral Vorath scowled at his sensor displays, certain they were malfunctioning. His crew stood frozen, too afraid to even breathe. "It's a sensor ghost," Vorath finally growled. "There is no other explanation." His chief science officer swallowed nervously. "Sir, with all due respect, we have run 17 different diagnostic checks. The readings are real. There are 15,000 warships positioned directly behind us." Vorath spun around, his massive stone body making the bridge feel tiny. His eyes, as black and empty as deep space, drilled into the officer. "Fleets do not simply appear out of nothing. They do not exist without a record, and they do not hang around in empty space for no reason." He took a thundering step closer. "Find out what I'm looking at, or I will find someone who can." Just then, another officer spoke up. "Admiral, the unknown fleet, it's just sitting there. They aren't advancing, but they aren't retreating. They're just watching us." Vorath turned back to the view screen. The silent black ships hung there in a flawless formation, 15,000 of them, perfectly still. It was wrong. A fleet was a noisy, messy thing. This was a pack of hunters. Vorath wouldn't admit it out loud, but it was incredibly unsettling. "Hail them," he ordered. "I want to know who these phantoms are." The communication request went out, but for long, tense minutes the only response was the hiss of static. The Ghost Fleet remained silent. "No response," Vorath announced, his voice full of false confidence. "They are either unable or unwilling to talk. It doesn't matter. They are a ghost story, nothing more. We continue to the core worlds. They can follow if they want. It changes nothing." His second-in-command cleared his throat. "Admiral, perhaps we should investigate. We have no intelligence on their capabilities. To turn our backs on such a large force is precisely what we are doing," Vorath snapped, cutting him off. "I have brought 40 star systems to their knees. I have shattered fleets 10 times this size. The word unknown does not frighten me. It only means I have not conquered them yet." He eased back into his command throne. "Set course for the core worlds, maximum speed. If these ghosts want a piece of us, they can try to keep up." As the massive Krath Armada powered forward, the Galactic Council was losing its collective mind. This ghost fleet had materialized from nowhere. The bloodthirsty Krath were acting like they weren't even there, and the entire galaxy was waiting for the other shoe to drop. High Chancellor Vithanar had every historian and military analyst in the archives, searching for any scrap of information. But the answer that came back was always the same: a big, fat nothing. These ships had no recorded history, no known design, no point of origin. By all galactic records, they simply should not exist. Could they be one of the precursor races? Representative Seiler hissed from his perch. The builders, maybe? The ones who built the stargates? Ambassador Trix shivered, her white fur standing on end. The builders disappeared millions of years ago. If they've come back, what could they want? A delegate made of living crystal rumbled with a hint of optimism. "Perhaps they have returned to save us." Seiler hissed again. "Or perhaps they've returned to burn the whole board clean. Remember, the enemy of your enemy is just another enemy you haven't met yet." The council chamber was pure chaos. Everyone was panicking, but in the corner reserved for the human delegation, Ambassador Elena Chen's aides just kept staring at her, desperate for some sign of hope. She gave them nothing. She just watched the screen, perfectly still. Finally, a young aide couldn't take it anymore. He leaned in and whispered, "Ambassador, you know something. I can see it. What's going on?" Elena turned her head, and her eyes looked like they held 1,000 years of secrets, a deep sadness mixed with an iron will. "Just watch," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "And remember this, one day you'll tell your kids this story. They'll need to understand why this moment changed everything." Before he could ask another question, the main view screen lit up. The Ghost Fleet was finally moving. "They're on the attack," a technician yelled. "The unknown ships are closing on the Krath Armada, and they're moving unbelievably fast." The entire chamber fell silent. Every alien ambassador watched as the wall of black ships just swallowed the distance to the Krath fleet, moving like a single terrifying creature. On his command ship, Admiral Vorath watched with a hunter's amusement. "Well, it's about time," he sneered. "Let's see what they've got." He had to admit they were impressive. They move well, I'll give them that. But good flying doesn't win wars. Big ships and bigger guns win wars. Let's find out what these ghosts are really made of. He leaned forward, a nasty smile spreading across his face. "If they came looking for a fight, we'll be happy to give them one. All ships, turn to face the enemy. Get ready to fire. Today, we add some new ghosts to our collection of trophies. 12,000 Krath warships, the conquerors of 40 star systems, turned as one. Their weapons whined as they powered up, their energy shields shimmering to life. They had never lost a battle, and they sure weren't planning to start today. The Ghost Fleet just kept coming. Then, a message cut through the silence. It was sent on every open channel, translated into every language in the galaxy, but it started in one. The voice of a human. "To the vessels of the Krath Dominion, you are violating the Treaty of Protected Worlds. You have one chance to stand down. This is your only warning." The message cut out. On Concordance Prime, you could have heard a feather drop. A human voice? But humans were just farmers. They didn't have a military. Pana. Every single head in the room snapped around to look at the tiny human section. Ambassador Elena Chen slowly got to her feet. She didn't have to say a thing. Her calm, knowing look said it all. She had been waiting for this day for a very, very long time. Ambassador Chen, the High Chancellor stammered, his voice shaking. What is the meaning of this? What do you know about that fleet? Elena met his eyes. Then she looked around the room at the hundreds of alien faces that had looked down on her people for 800 years, faces that had called humanity weak and useless. I know, she said, her voice carrying through the silent hall, that the Krath should have listened to that warning. Before her words even had a chance to sink in, the main screen flashed with a silent, horrifying light. The one-sided fight had begun. On his bridge, Admiral Vorath could only stare in disbelief. The ghost ships were firing, but his sensors weren't picking anything up. No lasers, no missiles, no torpedoes, just nothing. And then his fleet started to disappear. The first Krath warship simply stopped existing. One moment it was there, shields hot, guns ready. The next it was just a silent, expanding cloud of superheated gas. No explosion, no warning. Then a second ship vanished, and a third, and a fourth. What is happening? Vorath screamed, his famous arrogance finally shattering. Report! What kind of weapon is that? We don't know, sir, his science officer shrieked, his voice filled with pure terror. There's nothing on the sensors, no energy, no mass. Our ships are just gone. The shields do nothing. The armor is like paper. The silent destruction just kept going, ship after ship after ship. The Krath Armada, the most feared military in the galaxy, was being taken apart by an invisible, unstoppable force. Vorath watched his life's work, his empire, turn to space dust on the screen. 12,000 ships, the pride of his entire species, erased from the universe. Fire back, he roared. All ships, fire everything you've got. Wipe that ghost fleet from the sky. What was left of his fleet unleashed absolute hell. Thousands of weapons fired at once, a storm of energy and matter that had crushed entire planets. But the ghost fleet didn't even seem to notice. The attacks hit their targets. Vorath saw the explosions himself. But the black ships didn't break. They didn't burn. They didn't even slow down. They just soaked up all the punishment and kept on deleting his fleet. It was a complete nightmare. It was the end of everything the Krath had ever built. On Concordance Prime, the Council could only watch, frozen with a mixture of awe and terror. The whole battle was over in 11 minutes. In just 11 minutes, the most powerful war machine the galaxy had ever seen was turned into a floating junkyard. When the light faded, only 347 Krath ships were left, the few that had shut down their weapons and begged for mercy the second the fight started. The Ghost Fleet had let them live. 15,000 black ships now floated in the wreckage, without a single scratch on any of them. Then, as one, they started to turn. They turned away from the debris field and toward the center of the galaxy, toward Concordance Prime, toward the Galactic Council. The chamber exploded into a whole new kind of panic. The fear of the Krath was gone, replaced by the terrifying mystery of the ones who had saved them. This was a fear that was so much deeper than what was on the screen. Ambassador Elena Chen stood in the middle of the chaos, perfectly calm, totally unmoved. She simply raised a hand. "Hello, Chancellor," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the panic like a knife. "If it's all right, I'd like to address the Council." Vathnar just stared at her, his blue skin looking pale and sickly. His huge, powerful arms just hung at his sides. "Ambassador Chen," he finally managed to say, "I think you have a lot of explaining to do." Elena gave a slow nod. "Yes," she thought, "I sure do. And I will." But first, they all had to understand one very important thing. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with one alien leader after another. "No one is going to hurt you. No one is going to take your planets. And no one is going to make you their slaves. What you just saw was not an attack. It wasn't the beginning of a new war for the galaxy. She paused, letting that sink in. It was a rescue. It was what humanity has been getting ready to do for 847 years. And now, I'm going to tell you the truth about my people. The truth we've kept hidden for almost 1,000 years. The real reason we chose to be simple farmers when we could have been so much more. The Ghost Fleet kept getting closer, silent, patient, and waiting. And the entire galaxy waited with it, about to learn the biggest secret it never even knew existed. The silence in the council chamber was so thick you could feel it. It felt heavy, like it was crushing everyone, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. On the main screen, the Ghost Fleet had stopped. 15,000 black ships were just hanging in space, a solid wall of darkness, waiting. They were now less than an hour away from Concordance Prime. Ambassador Elena Chen walked slowly from the human delegations area to the main podium in the center of the room. Every single eye followed her. Every sensor in the room was locked on her. For 800 years, humans had been almost invisible. Now, in an instant, they were the only thing in the entire galaxy that mattered. Elena got to the podium and turned to face them all. Her face was calm, but her eyes looked heavy, like she was carrying something ancient. 847 years ago, she started. A Fenari scout ship found Earth by accident. Humanity was just a baby species back then. We were just starting to explore our own solar system. We had these huge dreams about what the galaxy would be like. We imagined meeting wise, ancient aliens who would teach us amazing things. We dreamed of being part of something bigger than ourselves. She paused. Instead, we learned the truth. The galaxy wasn't about wisdom and sharing. It was a jungle full of empires and wars. The strong hunted the weak. The weak either became servants or they were destroyed. The only law was power. The only justice was having the biggest stick. Around the room, a lot of the ambassadors started to squirm in their seats. What Elena said wasn't very nice, but nobody could say she was wrong. When we joined the Galactic Union, we were given a choice. We could try to build warships and fight with species that had been traveling the stars for millions of years. Or we could find a different way. Elena's hands tightened on the sides of the podium. You chose to be farmers, High Chancellor Vathnar said, his voice dripping with resentment. You chose to be nothing. No, Elena corrected him, her voice gentle but firm. We chose to look like nothing. There's a very big difference. She touched a button on the podium, and the main screen changed. It was now showing a live view of Earth, a beautiful ball of blue, green, and white hanging in the blackness of space. On the outside, we became exactly what the galaxy expected us to be. Farmers, artists, thinkers, we grew your food, we wrote your songs. We talked about philosophy, we kept to ourselves. We were peaceful, and honestly, pretty forgettable. Then the screen flickered, showing a different view. A pitch-black, empty void between galaxies, a place where nothing was supposed to exist. But underneath that quiet exterior, in the deepest, hidden corners of space-time that other races hadn't even discovered, we were up to something else. We were getting ready. As the image zoomed in, massive shapes began to appear in the darkness. We saw mind-boggling structures, shipyards that stretched for light years, factories churning out weapons built on impossible ideas, and academies where humans spent their whole lives mastering the art of war. For 847 years we built, Elena explained. We studied a type of physics the rest of the galaxy dismissed as pure fantasy. We designed weapons that worked on principles your best scientists haven't even conceived of. We constructed our ships in dimensions your sensors can't even detect. And we trained our people, generation after generation. Entire families lived and died in that deep, dark space, never seeing Earth, knowing nothing but this mission, all of them waiting, all of them preparing for the one day they might be called upon. The chamber was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Not a single soul stirred. We call it Terra Obscura, Elena said, the dark Earth. 15,000 ships, armed with technology 500 years ahead of anything else in this galaxy, and staffed by crews who have trained their entire lives for one mission: to protect, to conquer. hissed Representative Seiler from his seat. "You mean to conquer." Elena turned to the serpent-like alien, her calm expression never changing. "If we wanted to conquer you, Representative, we would have done it centuries ago. We could have taken over this entire galaxy at any point in the last 500 years. We chose not to. Do you understand? We chose not to." "But why?" asked Ambassador Trix, her voice small and filled with bewilderment. "Why hide so much power? Why pretend to be so weak when you were secretly so strong?" Elena paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was much softer. "Because a long, long time ago, humanity learned a hard lesson. Before we ever met another species, we spent thousands of years doing to ourselves exactly what the Krarth are doing to this galaxy. We started wars, we committed genocide. We enslaved, tortured, and destroyed one another. We were as monstrous as any species that has ever existed." She let that statement hang in the air. "And then one day, we finally saw ourselves for what we had become. We took a long, hard look in the mirror and were horrified. A deep, soul-crushing shame washed over us. We nearly destroyed ourselves before we finally found a better way. We learned that power without wisdom is just a fast track to ruin. That strength without compassion is just another word for cruelty. We learned that the ability to inflict pain is meaningless if you lack the self-control to choose peace." Elena glanced around the chamber again. "When we joined the galactic community, we saw the same old patterns. The strong crushing the weak, the powerful preying on the helpless. And we knew that if we revealed our true strength, we'd just become the next bully on the playground. Others would fear us. And fear breeds enemies. Enemies lead to war. And war always, without exception, leads to suffering. We had no desire to build another empire. We didn't want to become the new Krarth." "So you hid," the Chancellor said flatly. "So we hid," Elena confirmed. "We became farmers. We made ourselves insignificant. We let other species believe they were the powerful ones. We let them think they were in charge. And for every single day of those 847 years, we made the conscious choice not to use the incredible power we had built. Every single day, we chose peace." She looked back at the main screen. The ghost fleet was still there, silent and unmoving, but we also made a promise to ourselves, a promise to every human who had ever lived. We promised that never again would we stand by and watch as innocent people were slaughtered. Never again would we witness a genocide and do nothing. We promised that if a great evil ever rose to consume the galaxy, we would intervene. We would be the shield. Elena's voice grew firm. The Krarth came to dominate this galaxy. They came to enslave billions. They came to extinguish entire civilizations. They came to repeat the very same horrors humanity once inflicted upon itself. And that, representatives, is the one thing we will never, ever permit, not while a single human is left to draw breath. The chamber was still silent. "We never wanted to show our hand," Elena continued. "We hoped we'd never have to. For 800 years, we hoped the galaxy would learn to defend itself. We hoped peace would triumph over war. We hoped people would choose cooperation over conquest." She shook her head slowly. "But hope is not a strategy. The Krarth proved that. 12,000 warships, 40 conquered star systems, billions of people in chains. That's what happens when no one is strong enough to say no. That's what happens when evil is allowed to fester unchallenged." On the screen, the shattered pieces of the Krarth Armada drifted in the void. Thousands of destroyed ships, once the most feared force in the galaxy, were turned into scrap metal in just 11 minutes. "Now you know the truth," Elena said. "You know what the Ghost Fleet is. You know where it came from, and you know who we really are." She stepped back from the podium. "The only question left is, where do we go from here?" The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. At last, High Chancellor Vathnar broke it. What do you want from us, Ambassador Chen? What are humanity's demands?" Elena regarded him for a long, quiet moment. Then, a slow, sad, weary smile touched her lips. "Nothing," she said. Vathnar blinked all four of his eyes. "Nothing? Nothing. We don't want your planets. We don't want your resources. We don't want you to serve us or worship us or fear us. We want absolutely nothing from you." "Then why?" Trix asked, her voice trembling. "Why build a fleet like that? Why hide for centuries? Why save us? What was the point if you expect nothing in return?" Elena was quiet for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper, because it was the right thing to do. Because innocent people were about to die, and we could stop it. So we did. Because that's what humanity decided to be 800 years ago. Not conquerors. Not masters. Protectors. We protect because protecting others is good. We save lives because saving lives is good. We don't need any other motivation. We don't need a reward. She scanned the chamber one last time. The Terra Obscura fleet will now return to the void. We will go back to watching. We will go back to waiting. Humanity will go back to being your farmers, your artists, and your philosophers. Nothing has to change. In a few generations, you'll likely forget this ever happened, and that's fine. In fact, that's exactly what we hope for. Elena's voice then became resolute, a final, quiet pledge. But remember this, there are guardians out there in the darkness. If any species tries what the Krath did, if another empire rises on a wave of slavery and destruction, they will suffer the exact same fate. Not because we want power, and not because we want control, but because some things are simply wrong, and some wrongs must be made right. She turned and walked back to her seat. That is the truth about humanity. That's the secret we've kept for 847 years. And now you know it too. Behind her, the ghost fleet hung in the void, silent, patient, and vigilant. And for the first time in its long history, the Galactic Council was utterly speechless. The chamber remained frozen in silence for nearly 5 minutes after Elena Chen sat down. 200 species, some of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, just sat there, completely floored. They didn't know what to say. They couldn't even process what to think. Finally, Representative Seiler uncoiled his long frame from its perch and slithered to the center of the room. His iridescent scales shimmered as he turned to face the human delegation. "You lied to us," he hissed, his voice thick with rage. "For 800 years, you've been living a lie. You pretended to be weak and harmless. You watched us struggle and fight and die, and you did nothing. You could have stopped wars. You could have saved millions, and yet you chose to hide." Elena met his gaze, her expression impossible to read. "Yes." "Do you feel no shame?" Seiler demanded. "Do you feel no guilt for the countless lives you could have saved?" Elena was quiet for a second. When she finally answered, her voice was heavy, filled with an ancient, profound sorrow. "Every single day," she said softly. "For 847 years, humanity has carried that burden. We witnessed conflicts we knew we could stop. We saw suffering we could have ended, and we did nothing." She slowly rose to her feet. "Do you have any idea how difficult that was? Can you possibly imagine the cost of holding that much power and choosing not to wield it? To watch people die knowing you could save them, but also knowing that stepping in would risk unleashing something far worse upon the galaxy." Instead of heading to the podium, she walked right into the heart of the chamber, a lone human in a galaxy of alien faces. "We made a choice," she said, her voice steady. "A cold, brutal calculation. We knew if we ever showed our true strength, you'd fear us. That fear would fester into resentment, and that resentment would build alliances against us. Sooner or later, it would mean war. A war on a scale this galaxy has never seen. A war that would cost trillions of lives, not millions." She looked directly at Seiler. "So we hid. We let the little fires burn out to keep the great one from ever starting. We let thousands perish so that billions could live. We chose the lesser of two evils." "That sounds like a very convenient excuse." Seiler shot back, his voice dripping with ice. "It's not an excuse," Elena replied. "It's a confession. We know exactly what we've done. We carry the weight of that choice every single day. Every human alive shares that burden. It's the price we pay to be guardians. You can't save everyone. You can only try to save as many as you can." Ambassador Trix, a delicate bird-like creature, rose, trembling. But why reveal yourselves now? If your whole plan was to stay hidden, why tell us the truth? Elena turned to her. Because the Krath were different. They weren't a brushfire war. This wasn't some local dispute. They were on a mission to consume everything. Every species, every planet, every living thing in this galaxy would have been enslaved or erased. That wasn't an evil we could ignore. That was the great war we'd spent centuries trying to stop. She opened her hands, a gesture of surrender. We had no other option. Either we showed our hand or we watched the galaxy fall. And whatever our past sins, whatever secrets we've kept, we could not let that happen. Humanity might be willing to let smaller evils slide, but we will never ever stand by while total darkness takes over. High Chancellor Vathnar leaned forward in his enormous chair. Ambassador Chen, I need a straight answer to a straight question. I need the truth. Ask, Elena said simply. You claim you want nothing from us. You say you'll go back to being quiet farmers. But how can we believe you? You've lied for 800 years. Why should we trust a single word you say now? Elena gave a slow nod. It was a fair point. You shouldn't, she said. Not based on my words, at least. Words are cheap. Anyone can make a promise. The Krath promised liberation right before they scoured their first planet. Words mean nothing. She pulled a small, sleek device from her pocket. With a touch of a button, the massive view screen above them came to life. Let me show you what real trust looks like. The screen showed a planet, a stunningly beautiful world of swirling blue oceans and rich green land masses. It hung in the void of space, a vibrant jewel of life. We call this planet New Haven, Elena said. It's one of 12 colony worlds we established in the deep void, far from any star charts you know. It was settled 300 years ago. 7 billion of our people call it home. She pressed another button. The view pulled back, revealing the space all around the planet. It was empty, completely empty. No defense grids, no weapons platforms, no orbital fleets, nothing. New Haven has no military, Elena went on. No weapons, no shields. If any of you decided to attack it, you could wipe it out before breakfast. A shockwave of murmurs rippled through the chamber. This is our proof, Elena said, her voice ringing with clarity. We just showed you where our civilians live. We've shown you they are utterly defenseless. If we were planning to conquer you, would we give you such a perfect target? If we were your enemy, would we hand you a hostage? She turned the device off. Humanity's power isn't just in our warships. Our true strength is our willingness to be vulnerable. We are trusting you not to attack New Haven. We are trusting you not to hurt our people. And in return, all we ask is for you to trust us not to hurt yours. The chamber was silent again, but it was a new kind of silence. Not shock, not fear. It felt different. It felt like understanding. You could have kept that a secret, Vathnar said, his voice a low rumble. You could have shown us your power without ever revealing your weakness. Why tell us about New Haven? Elena gave a small, sad smile. Because trust is a gift, Chancellor. It has to be given, with no strings attached, or it means nothing. We are giving you our trust. What you choose to do with it will tell us what kind of galaxy we truly live in. A long moment passed. Then, to everyone's surprise, a colossal being made of living stone began to speak, his voice like the grinding of continents. I have lived for 3,000 years, he grated. I've seen empires rise and fall to dust. I've seen species bloom and wither away. I have seen great evil and precious little good. He paused. I have never, ever seen a species show its greatest vulnerability to those it could easily crush. I have never seen such trust given so freely. I do not fully understand humanity. I doubt I ever will. But I believe you, Ambassador Chen. I believe you are who you claim to be. One by one, others began to speak up. Some were still angry. Some were still scared. But a new feeling was spreading through the chamber. Respect, awe, maybe even gratitude. What about the Krath who survived? Someone shouted. The crews on the ships that surrendered? What happens to them? Elena nodded. An excellent question. We won't execute them. We won't enslave them. We won't even punish them. That sent a whole new wave of confusion through the hall. They came to annihilate you, Siler sputtered. They came to conquer and kill, and you're just letting them walk? No, Elena corrected him gently. We're not letting them go. We're going to help them. She signaled, and the view screen lit up once more, displaying another planet. This one was wilder than New Haven, a world of rugged mountains and stark, beautiful wilderness. But it was clearly a world that could support life. This world has been prepared for the Krath survivors, Elena explained. It has shelters, food, clean water, everything they need to start a new life. We will take them there. We will give them tools and knowledge. We will give them a chance to build a new civilization from scratch. But why? Trix asked, her voice filled with honest bewilderment. They are your enemies. They would have wiped you from existence. Elena met her gaze. Representative Trix, do you know why humanity nearly destroyed itself centuries ago? Trix shook her head. Because we used to think that enemies were problems to be solved with force. We believed the only way to stop evil was to destroy the people doing evil things. Kill your enemy, the war is over. Simple, clean, and final. Elena's voice dropped to almost a whisper. But it never ever worked. Every enemy we killed just created two more. Sons looking for revenge. Daughters demanding justice. Entire nations fueled by old hatreds. The killing never stopped because the hate never stopped. Violence only ever made more violence. Death only ever created more death. It was a cycle that had no end. She looked around the quiet room. When humanity finally broke that cycle, it wasn't because we became stronger. It's because we became wiser. We learned that enemies aren't problems you erase. They're people you can redeem. You don't end evil by killing the evildoer. You end evil by showing them a better way to live. She gestured toward the planet on the screen. The Krath were taught that conquest is the only path. Their whole culture was built on the idea that the strong have a right to rule the weak. That is evil, yes, but it's an evil that was learned. And anything that can be learned can be unlearned. Elena's voice grew firm again. We will give the Krath survivors a second chance, a chance to build something new, a chance to be better than they were. Maybe they'll fail. Maybe they'll fall back on their old ways and try to build another empire of cruelty. And if they do that, we will stop them again. But there is a chance, maybe a small one, that some of them will choose a different path, a chance they will become something more. A faint smile touched her lips. That one hope, representatives, is worth far more than their utter destruction could ever be. It is the very reason humanity chooses mercy, even when our own hearts are screaming for revenge. The chamber was silent, but it was a silence of deep thought and reflection. High Chancellor Vithanar slowly rose to his feet, his age giving him a certain grace. Ambassador Chen, he began, his voice filled with a new respect. I have served this council for 70 years. I thought I had seen it all, but today you have proven me wrong. I have never seen a species like humanity. He made a formal gesture of deference. On behalf of the Galactic Council, thank you for saving us, for trusting us, and for showing us that real strength isn't found in destruction, but in restraint. For 800 years, they called us simple farmers. The quiet, unassuming species you could always count on for a good harvest, but not much else. They thought we were harmless. They were wrong. And when the most terrifying armada in galactic history showed up to enslave them all, our secret was the only thing that could stop it. What would you do if revealing the truth about who you are could save everyone, but change your world forever? Stick with me to find out what humanity chose. It had been just 3 days since that final, universe-shattering battle. 3 days since our ghost fleet appeared from nowhere and took apart the most powerful navy in the galaxy like it was nothing. 3 days since humanity's biggest secret was finally out. The story spread like wildfire across the star lanes. On billions of worlds, people were glued to their screens, watching holographic replays of our ships dancing through enemy fire. their minds refusing to believe what they were seeing. Trillions more listened as Elena Chen's speech was translated into 1,000 different languages, telling them for the very first time about the humble farmers who were also silent guardians. The reactions were all over the map. So many worlds celebrated us as heroes, flooding our home systems with messages of gratitude. Humans who had been living quiet lives on other planets were suddenly being treated like celebrities. But for every cheer, there was a whisper of fear. If humans could hide this kind of power for so long, what else weren't they telling us? Could they really be trusted? Alliances were being frantically discussed, emergency meetings called to figure out how to handle the human threat, even though we hadn't made a single aggressive move. And then there were the ones who just felt ashamed. For 8 centuries, they had looked down on us, treating us like galactic country bumpkins. Now, the bitter truth of their own arrogance was a tough pill to swallow. Back on the capital world, the Galactic Council was still in session. For 3 straight days, they had argued, barely stopping to eat or sleep, trying to figure out what this all meant. And through it all, Ambassador Elena Chen sat and watched, the exhaustion clear in her eyes. In those 3 days, she must have answered the same questions 100 times over. Why the secret? How strong are you really? What do you want now? And she gave the same honest answer every single time. Sometimes they believed her, sometimes they didn't, but honestly, she was done with the debate. She had told the truth. What the galaxy did with it was up to them. All she wanted was a single moment of quiet. A soft chime from her communicator gave her the perfect excuse. She looked at the message and slowly got to her feet. "Excuse me," she whispered to her team. "I have something I need to take care of." She walked out of this massive chamber, her steps the only sound in the long, empty corridors, until she reached a private observation deck. The room was dark, except for the light of 1,000,000,000 stars. A single figure stood by the huge window, a woman in a stark black uniform. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo, the supreme commander of our hidden fleet. Elena walked up and stood beside her. For a long time, they just stood there together in silence, watching the stars drift by. "How are the crews?" Elena finally asked, her voice soft. Sarah let out a long, tired sigh. "Some of them are just crying," she said. "Imagine dedicating your whole life to a fight you hope never comes. Now that it's over, they're just adrift. They don't know what to do with the quiet." She finally turned away from the window to look at Elena. "A few have asked to go home, to see Earth for the first time. Can you believe it? Many of them have never even stood on a planet. Their great-grandparents were born in the void. All they have of home are stories of blue skies and green forests." Elena nodded. "Let them go. Every single one who wants to. They've earned it 1,000 times over." "Most won't go, though," Sarah said quietly. "Most are choosing to head back out, back to the watch." "But why?" Sarah gave a sad, tired smile. "Because the job isn't done. We beat the Krath, sure, but there will always be someone else. Someone out there who thinks taking what they want is easier than building it. Someone will always decide that their ambition is worth more than other people's lives. And when that day comes, we have to be there to meet them." She looked back at the star field. "That's the real price of being a protector, Ambassador. The work is never finished. The watch never ends. You don't get to save the galaxy just once and hang up your cape. You have to be ready to save it again, and again, forever." Elena didn't say anything. She knew that feeling all too well. She'd been carrying her own version of that weight for 30 years, pretending to be nothing more than the representative of simple farmers. "I spoke to the council about the Krath survivors," Elena said, changing the subject. "They've agreed to let us handle their recovery." No surprise there. No other species wanted the job. Sarah nodded. "We've already moved them to a sanctuary world we prepared. Most are still in shock. A few are angry, trying to fight our medics." "Any of our people hurt?" "No. They were trained for this. They know how to de-escalate. They know how to be patient." Sarah paused. "There is one, though. A Krath admiral named Vorath. He survived the battle, and he keeps demanding to speak with a human leader. He says he has to understand. Elena raised an eyebrow. Understand what? Everything, Sarah replied with a shrug. Why we saved his people when we could have just wiped them out. Why we're helping the very ones who came to destroy us. Why we did any of it. The man is completely broken. His entire view of the universe, of strength and weakness, has been shattered. He has no way to process what he saw. Elena thought about that for a second. I think I'd like to talk to him, eventually. When things calm down, I'll set it up. They stood in a comfortable silence again. Outside the window, a ghost ship drifted past, a sliver of pure black against the stars, waiting to slip back into the darkness and resume its endless patrol. Do you think it was worth it? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. All of it? 800 years of hiding in the dark, was it worth the price we paid? Sarah didn't answer right away. I honestly don't know, she finally said. I know what we prevented. The galaxy is still free. Billions of people are alive today who would be in chains right now. That has to count for something. It has to. She paused. But I also know what it cost us. Generations of our people who never felt sunlight on their face. Entire families who lived and died in the deep dark, knowing nothing but their duty. Kids who learned battle strategy before they learned nursery rhymes. We gave up a part of our own humanity to protect everyone else's. Sometimes, I wonder if we gave up too much. Elena had no answer for that. It was a question that couldn't be answered. Well, the galaxy knows now, Elena said instead. Things will never be the same. We'll be feared, hated by some. They'll try to use us, manipulate us. The life we knew is gone. You're right, Sarah agreed. It is. She turned to Elena, and there was a new kind of light in her eyes. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe this is what the universe needed, a wake-up call. Maybe it's time for humanity to finally step out of the shadows. We've been ghosts for long enough. Maybe it's time we learned how to be people again, out in the open. Elena actually smiled, a real smile. That's pretty optimistic, coming from the commander of a secret ghost fleet. Sarah's own smile matched hers. Hey, one of us has to be. If the protectors lose hope, then what chance does anybody else have? Just then, the door slid open. One of Elena's aides was standing there, looking nervous. Ambassador, I'm so sorry to interrupt. The Council is asking for you. They're ready to start discussing the terms of humanity's new official place in the Galactic Union. Elena let out a quiet sigh. More talks. More questions. More trying to explain the unexplainable. It seemed a diplomat's work was just as endless as a soldier's. I'll be right there, she said. The aide nodded and vanished. Elena turned back to the Admiral. Well, I guess that's my cue. Sarah held out her hand and Elena shook it. It was a firm, solid grip. Keep them safe, Ambassador, Sarah said. We'll be out there, watching. Always. And you take care of your people, Elena replied. You're not just our shield, you're our family. Don't ever forget that. Sarah's smile was real this time. We'll try. And with that, they turned and walked their separate ways. As the last glimmer of hope for the galaxy flickered out, the Council turned to their last resort, the woman they'd ignored for years. Elena Chen, the ambassador from a dead race called humanity. They saw her as a relic, a ghost, and their expressions were a mix of pity and scorn. But facing total annihilation, they were desperate enough to listen to a ghost. What they didn't know was that this ghost was about to show them the meaning of power. And if you want to see how the forgotten underdog saved everyone who looked down on them, you're not going to want to miss a second of this. Elena calmly watched them panic before she spoke. We can stop them, she said. A ripple of disbelief filled the chamber. We, sneered a pompous official, your people are dust and memories. Elena just smiled. Are we? A few hours later, as the enemy fleet prepared its final devastating attack, a single, tiny tear in space-time appeared on the main view screen. Out of it drifted one ship. It was pitch black, ancient, and covered in scars. The council chamber fell into a stunned, disappointed silence. This was their salvation, one broken-down old ship. Then, the impossible happened. The lone ship wasn't a ship at all. It was a key. It unlocked a gate to nowhere, and from that inky blackness, a fleet poured out. Thousands upon thousands of colossal warships, silent and dark, emerged from the void, forming a wall of steel between the galaxy and its doom. The council members stared, mouths agape. Who are they? The High Chancellor stammered, his voice trembling. Elena finally dropped the bombshell. They are the ghosts, she said, her voice ringing with 800 years of pride. They are the Terra Obscura, the unseen fleet of Earth. While you built monuments, we built a shield, and we have been guarding you from the shadows this entire time. The enemy ships were wiped from existence in a matter of minutes. When the last one vanished, the Chancellor turned to Elena, humbled. Will they come back? She met his gaze. Only if you need them. True strength isn't about the power to destroy. It's about the will to protect. And humanity will always choose to protect. It's just who we are. In the silent, empty darkness between galaxies, 15,000 colossal warships resumed their endless, lonely patrol. On board, crews slipped back into routines honed over generations of watching, training, and waiting. The call could come tomorrow, or it could come in another 1,000 years. It made no difference. They would always be ready. It was the price they paid to be humanity's secret guardians, a burden they carried with a quiet, unbreakable pride. On a dimly lit observation deck, a young crewman named Leo stared into the endless sea of stars. He had never once set foot on a planet, never felt the sun on his skin or the wind in his hair. He was a child of the void, just like his parents, and their parents before them. But looking out at the distant glittering galaxies, he knew exactly why he was there. He knew exactly who he was fighting for. He knew that light years away, on beautiful worlds he would only ever see in pictures, billions of souls were sleeping peacefully because he and his crewmates were awake. They were safe to laugh, to love, and to live their lives because his family had chosen to live theirs out here, in the dark. The thought was more than enough. It would always be enough. A small, content smile touched his lips as he turned from the window and walked back to his station. The long watch continued. The unseen protectors remained vigilant, and the galaxy, thanks to its forgotten ghosts, was safe.